Call the meeting to order. Happy New Year, everyone and all. And before we do roll call, I'd like to welcome Chris Buckley, the newest member of the board, representative of the Conservation Commission. And Eugene Thurston's here, John Kelly, Rebecca Hansen, Bill Bolton, Brian Dutel, Chris Buckley, Sharon Penny, special guest star, Brian Murphy, and myself. So who was not here at the last meeting? Just to clear things up. Okay, Eugene, everybody else was here? Okay. The main business tonight is to go over these proposed zoning amendments. And after our last meeting, the board had come to a unanimous decision on language and what we were going to do going forward. It went off to the attorney. I came back with some suggestions from the attorney, some of which were suggestions that were not in line with what we had asked for. And Brian and Sharon and I had a meeting yesterday and went through his red lines and
the attorneys.
Yeah, took away the things, put back the things that we wanted, and left the things that that we thought were appropriate from his side. So I would say, has everybody read this yet? If you haven't, let's just take a few minutes. Are we all good on this one? This is new as of yesterday. So.
And it incorporates all the changes. I just took the red lines out because it's basically been reworked so many times. I wanted a clean document, so.
And tonight is a public hearing night, so we're going to do this public hearing in three parts, basically. The first part will be the proposed accessory dwelling unit by conditional use permit. The second part will be proposed changes to the sign ordinance. And the third part will be proposed definitions from our current zoning. And we'll kind of do these as we go along, and depend on Sharon and Brian to answer questions on the various sections. So let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to read through this thoroughly so that we can.
Before you start, I would just like to say that a conditional use permit is a planning and zoning tool that we haven't used heretofore. It's not on the books, and that's why it's incorporated in that first warrant article for ADUs, because it allows us to put parameters on the ADUs that we wouldn't ordinarily do, because they wouldn't ordinarily go under site plan review, because it's for private single-family residential homes. So it's just a tool. It's kind of like a mini site plan review, but a little different, just by way of edification. And that's why I gave you the definition sheet on that too, if you need reference.
So this conditional use permit would be kind of in the checklist format that Brian and Sharon will design together. And if someone comes in and wants to do an ADU, they sit down with them and go through this checklist of the conditions they have to meet. And those are all the conditions that we cover in the language of our proposed change. So before we open the public hearing on the accessory dwelling unit question. Want to take any questions from the board or discussion from the board before we do that? And if you look on the criteria page, which is the second page, and the letters K, L, and M, those were additions that you have not seen since our last meeting. Those were in part recommended by the attorney and Brian and Sharon. Brian, do you want to explain letter J there? So, because that's was a little confusing to me.
Okay.
You may remember.
To put it in simple terms, you're all aware of the building setbacks, 30 feet in the front, 15 to sides and rear. A lot of the houses were built prior to the zoning even coming to town. So not only do we have them actually in the road, but many of the buildings either straddle the line or are right adjacent to it. So that is the non-conforming aspect of the property. So the way I put it to the chairman was, you couldn't put your ADU on that side, but if you had sufficient room on the other side to meet that 15-foot setback, you could do it there. It's basically the simplest way to go, and that follows what we currently do as a matter of policy. You can't increase the encroachment, is basically what that is saying. So you might, and there's relief for this too. So if you had adequate room to build it, but you would fail setbacks, that's appealable to the ZBA. And fundamentally, it's not a question of money, but more of design or convenience. So, we just have to look at it as where that portion is going to be improved if it's a bump out to an existing home. Now, say you had adequate space in the home that you could carve it in two and half of it was already encroaching in the setback, you're not increasing the nonconformance. So it's basically saving, and it pretty much will force people to build where there's available space rather than put it where it's ultimately the most convenient. The fact that there is a door required in there is going to dictate where that is. Now, the legislature didn't define what they're considering a door. So as long as you can get into that other unit, but it doesn't say that it has to meet, 6'8", 3 feet wide, just access in. And I can only imagine that that is for convenience of the person having to clean up, after the tenant moves in. Say, and this goes, you have a 36-foot building, and there aren't any, but this is for instance. The height limit is 35 feet. You couldn't put it in the attic and go up more, because that increases the nonconformance. So basically, wherever there's a limit to where you can build on the property, you have to honor that. And, in certain cases where you would need to encroach on the front setback, that's appealable to the ZBA. So none of these things are exempt from current zoning. This only, I hate to use the term reedify, but basically it reinforces the policy that's already common throughout the state as far as setbacks and nonconformance.
Mr. Chair, maybe we should start at the beginning with a little preface about why we're dealing with this right now, because we have a little bit of an audience, but I'm sure we'll have more of a television audience, to the fact that this is a state legislatively mandated zoning allowance.
Right.
And, if you want to...
Yeah, I was just going to do that right before we open the public hearing, kind of give people the background.
Because people need to understand that this is automatically in place when it is, with no strictures on it other than, the legislation, if these amendments don't go forth.
Which is another way of saying that if we don't put criteria,
Right.
then it's wide open to everybody. It's a matter of right, and it's important.
Yeah, we'll do a little summary before we open the public
That's fine. I just wanted to
hearing.
make sure, because we do have a wider digital audience, so.
So any questions from the board on this issue?
In F, the referencing the RSA, which I think is the
Oh,
ADU.
Yeah,
that's
I double checked that and I went back and looked at it and it is in the RSA. I know we had said yesterday we would take that out, but the RSA, 674-72, it's right there and it says,
Roman numeral 7.
yeah, that the municipality may do thus and such, provided that the size may not be restricted to less than 750 feet. So just to get the parameters in so that someone doesn't come in with a 250 square foot.
Right, I guess I just thought last meeting we had decided that we didn't want to set
correct.
what the standard minimum
Right,
living
but,
space was.
but there is a standard minimum.
Where
It's
specifically?
specifically
674, 72, Roman numeral 7.
7 down at the bottom.
That's something that most of us,
May not be restricted to less, doesn't say that's not a minimum.
it says we can't set a maximum square foot less than 700
750.
square feet.
It's this legalese language that is maddening.
May not be restricted to less than 750. So you can't tell somebody that the biggest
Okay.
one you can have is 750 or 500 or
Right,
whatever.
you're right.
So
Right.
that-
That was
that-
an end of the day glitch.
Okay, so that F needs to go back to the way we
Yep.
had it. Good catch.
Thank you. I was brain dead right after this.
So any other comments on, well, it's actually, Brian, you want to do K as well, so while we're here?
Sure. We talked about requirements of having an interior stairway. And, you know, in a design thing, that's one thing. But for life safety, rather than require it to be interior, to allow an exterior one provided that it is covered and/or enclosed. So, you know, you could put, typically it's a fire escape style stair alongside a building, right? It would have to have a roof over it just for safety, or you could enclose the whole thing all the way to the ground to make it look like it was part of the building, even though it was exterior to it.
So Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you say that this exterior stairway did not apply to emergency egress?
Correct.
All right, so an emergency egress such as a fire escape
Right.
would not require a roof.
There are multifamily homes now that have open stairs. So, you know, and those have always been a problem for the fire department. The landlords aren't 100% in keeping them shoveled and sanded. There's been incidences of slips on it. No fatalities at this point, but people do get skinned up quite a bit. So that, for one, it's going to make it look like it was built from the beginning rather than tacked on. And if we were talking about design aspects of the ADU to mirror the existing home, I thought the best way to get all of that together in one ball was to require it to be covered and/or enclosed, rather than require it to be interior, which was what was on one of the original ideas.
Yes, sir.
Just a question about that. When we're talking about an exterior stairway, are we talking just about ADUs that might be on a second story?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if we need to, I mean, to me, stairway could be, you know, is that different than a 3 steps up to somebody's
Right, I
front
had this
porch?
conversation with town council and looking through all the code books and their definitions. They don't refer to anything other than the fact that a stairway can't have more than 12 steps, you know, without a landing of some sort. So we all have to step up into our houses. You know, a porch is a porch. That I don't consider a stair, though technically it is. It would have to be something more along the lines of the front stairs to town hall, for example. And rather than throw a definition on there, just refer to it as the whole thing. So if you had a ground floor ADU, you could certainly have a porch, you know, that you would walk up and get into the house that way. But mostly, and you're correct, Rebecca, this was for second floor ADUs.
I just want to make sure that we're not requiring everyone that has, 2 stairs to.
No, and that, I twigged on that originally too, and I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't an existing definition that dealt with what exactly flight of stairs was. So,
No, I'm just,
Any other questions on the stairway issue? Okay, the last one was conveyance of the primary and the ADU. And basically, my read of this is that they have to be conveyed as one, and they cannot be condoized. In other words, you can't divide the ownership in terms of a condominium. And Brian asked in our little meeting, well, what if it's a divorced couple and one of them wants to live in one side, one of them wants to live in the other?
they'd have to still hold it in common, is the only answer to that. As uncomfortable as that may be, that's going to be a pretty extraneous case.
Or have a buyout. I mean, this is going to be interesting as we go.
Yeah, because, this, when we're speaking of conveyance, the next owner down the line, if he chooses not to live in that unit, cannot have a two-family. It has to revert to a single family. Because one of the criteria that we have is that the principal residence or domicile of the owner. So that is going to keep folks from investing in an ADU just to get that extra $3,700 a semester and pass it off to the commercial market. It would still remain a single-family home. And
Does that mean that if a parent of a person owning the principal home wanted to be independent and own the ADU and have a mortgage on it, they couldn't do it?
they could not. They could certainly do it as a private thing between the children and the parent.
They have to be on
But
the
that's not
premises.
unconveyable. That would just be a matter of convenience for the owner of the property.
Any other questions on the legal aspects? The other thing we did add in here was no additional curb cuts. That was not in the previous document,
Oh, that was good.
and we felt that would help the parking problems that we have moving forward. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this thing? All right, so what we're going to do is move on and do our public hearing. And we'll kind of do it in 3 steps. We'll do the ADU first, then we're going to do the sign ordinance changes that really are mandated by federal law, federal case law. And lastly, we're going to do the definitions that the board felt needed, and Sharon and Brian felt needed to be updated or added in to make our zoning more clear and comprehensible to the applicants and the neighbors. So accessory dwelling unit zoning is required by the state. And for those of you that are in the audience, I don't know, if you guys had that in the back row there? Is it on the table?
It's on the table.
It might be on the table there. It says planning for accessory dwellings. Anyway, this gives you the background from the state. The idea here is to provide a way for people to save money on their taxes, to provide more housing at a lesser rate, to help care for the elderly or your in-laws. There's a lot of different reasons, and those are outlined in the first section of purpose intent of our proposed zoning changes. Affordable housing, increasing the housing supply, benefits for aging homeowners, and integrating affordable housing into the community, and providing elderly citizens with a supportive family environment. Plymouth's a little bit different because we're a college town, and that has kind of skews the effects of this required legislation. And The state basically said there's certain things you can do and certain things you cannot do in your proposed legislation. And if the town does not avail themselves of the opportunity to set the changes that they can do, or this warrant does not pass at the town meeting, then we revert by default to the state's legislative requirements, in which there are very few controls. And in a university town like Plymouth, where we have conflicts in the village area, it's really not in our best interest. So the board and the planning and building departments really strongly feel that we need the voters of the town to understand that this is our opportunity to put some meats and bounds on this whole project. This is not like the marijuana referendum where it was a notification deal. We actually can make it to where we want it to a certain extent. So that's the background. So we're going to open the public hearing now at 8 minutes of 7. And I think first, if there's any questions from the public, we'll go with that. And
I have a question, Frank Miller. On this accessory unit that would be constructed, say, on the second floor, if we're a member of the International Building Code system, we acknowledge that's the code of which we design, this structure would have to have an interior doorway, and the exterior doorway would have to be of a specific dimension to meet the life safety code. So I'm listening to Brian Murphy about stairs, access. You still need to acknowledge the accessory structure would be built to the international code standards for access.
don't we have that in here, Brian, somewhere?
That would be one of the criteria, Frank.
Okay.
As far as its construction shall meet all building code safety compliance. Okay. And to amplify a little bit on what you said, the exterior door does have to be 6'8" by 3'0", but you can't use the connecting one, and I can probably, I should run this by the fire chief, as a means of emergency egress, because it leads to an equal or more hazardous area.
Right, I'm just thinking of that we know this, fairly familiar with code systems, but the normal homeowner, and being that this is is this an adaptating an existing structure, deals with different chapters within the code systems to try to facilitate without having to change any major walls of the existing structure, the types of entryway in and out of the building. So I'm just thinking of an applicant coming to the board to get something and not fully understanding that element. But I think if the comments in there about complying with all the codes, most of the people would probably hire a contractor to do that, and they'd know the difference. So, but that was my thing, just listening to the discussion about an accessory structure adding on to an existing, and then having these different doors, because I have a old structure that wasn't issued, and trying to fit the existing structure to meet that accessibility part is sometimes tricky.
Thanks, Frank. Any other questions from the board? Yes.
Could you clarify, Chris Woods, Fairgrounds Road, could you clarify where you ended up with the minimum size requirement?
Yes, there is no minimum size
Okay.
requirement. And at our last meeting, we kind of went back and forth, and the 750 was kind of thrown out originally, but I think the board members, we started talking about studio apartments and tiny houses, and we really felt that number was too big. And then we said, well, what's an appropriate number? And then we just finally decided that we weren't going to specify how big it had to be.
We had a not to exceed, so we kind of did the inverse because it was making us crazy.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's not a minimum of 500. I mean, given the high cost of construction, I'm sure a lot of people would be on the fence Even, you don't think that would be a lot, but I can see how that could be a pretty expensive project, and, or at 750 rather, getting down to 400 or 500, it makes it much more affordable, I think. for
You know,
people.
of course, the language in the statutes, I know you deal with it all the time, is just, I mean, it is not in plain English, and it usually is meaning A, but while saying B.
Yes.
So it is the inverse.
Yeah.
It's maddening.
Well, thank you.
Yes, Frank?
I got one more question. If this is a mandated legislative package, and a person ends up with they're gonna be into their setback area, they're gonna be going to the zoning board, and it'd be a default mode of, this is the only place they can put it. Doesn't that put the conflict between the boards and trying one judge to whether or not should be allowed, and the other board saying it's...
This is all, the reason this is so maddening, aside from the fact that it's a mandate, is because it is always going to be site-specific to a lot. And we have a lot of variations in lots, as you know, and non-conforming, legal non-conforming and everything. So we're trying to, A, implement a mandate, B, put some reasonable strictures on it so that everyone can live in harmony, and C, wait to see what it is, because you have the option of detached, attached, and, upstairs, downstairs, sideways. So it's going to be very, it would really be site-specific, Frank. It really would be. Yeah.
Do you have any other comments from the public on the accessory dwelling unit issue? Okay, so we're going to move on. We're not going to close the public hearing. We're just going to continue on to the other portions of this. And
So the only change we have on this is to remove on F the verbiage that says shall not be less than 750 square feet in size, blah, blah, blah. So it says, it should say, the ADU shall not exceed 1,000 square feet in habitable floor area. We all agree on that. So I'll change that back.
okay, so we're going to move on to the sign section now. And if Brian can give us a rundown on why we need it and point out any highlights.
Okay, once again, this came down from on high. There was a Supreme Court case, Reed versus Gilbert, where it came through the Supreme Court. Their final ruling was that you can no longer differentiate between free speech and commercial speech. So we have to view it as content neutral. So any references to, and I sent this off to the town attorney, and he redlined, what's the wrong one? All of the places where it would run afoul. So most of this is just striking. And there are a few things that, it's just verbiage that are thrown in there. References back to the town master plan and the purpose. But say, for example, the bulletin board used to say any sign erected by a charitable, educational, religious, or government public body. That has to be stricken, so it just reads any sign erected for purposes of events. So it's kind of a subtle difference, but evidently it's telling because it did go to the Supreme Court. You'll see in flags, we have to strike out anything that, a flag is a flag now. It's not, if you flew the CBS banner, you'd have to look at it as just a banner, or as like a welcome or open sign, for that matter.
Wasn't the Supreme Court case something about a church signage or something?
It was long and involved, and basically they said, Solomon will strike all that language and make it so. And I think it follows on the heels of Citizens United, as far as free speech being extended towards commercial entities. So we were in pretty good shape with the ordinance that we had. as far as not crossing that line. And there were very few red lines throughout the entire sign ordinance. For example, when they talk about exempt signs, we used to exempt real estate signs when offering the property for sale. So now it's just one sign, the size of which shall not exceed 4 square feet. So we can't refer back to why the sign is there. Now, if Joe Carpenter wants to put a sign up on his lot, he still has to get a permit, he still has to go by the size requirements that we have in zoning, but we can't out of hand deny it because it's a commercial use in the single-family zone, for example. Things like not having wall-mounted signs in the SFR still invalid, but that's only because it's where it's located, not what it's saying. So, like I said, it's kind of subtle in the intent. So we just have to kind of look at it and say, okay, anything that refers to anything can't be in there. It just has to look at it as a sign, not, by type.
So what goes on it is not relevant.
And, again, this is one of the things where, should this not pass, it will be enforced as if it was passed, just to be compliant with the Supreme Court. The law of the land is the law of the land.
We just really need to clean this
Yeah,
up because
and-
it's totally contradictory and confusing and, yeah.
Going
It's
forward,
housekeeping.
if it's in the book, then it's in the book. It's as simple as that, rather than leaving it, discretionary, which is always a problem.
Any questions from the public about the proposed changes? Any questions from the board on that? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to our last portion of the public hearing, which has to do with our proposed definitions. So that's this document here. There's new or revised definitions from the planning board for 2017. And basically, the whole board worked on this. We went through and decided what definitions were confusing, contradictory, or lacking. And this is what we came up with. The accessory dwelling unit, of course, is defined in these other warrant articles, so we're not
Separately.
detailing that here. The board has looked at all of this numerous times. I will say that one of the main things we did was that we reorganized healthcare facility kind of under one category, so that you could see at a glance what we considered a healthcare facility and what we didn't. The only definition that we really kind of went around and round on was bed and breakfast on the last page. And we set the limit at 4 rentable rooms, so that'd be 4 rooms for rent. I believe there are a few properties in town that have more than that are classified as, or call themselves bed and breakfast. So those would be grandfathered and not affected by this definition. So I'm going to give the public a couple minutes here to kind of look through this, and the board as well, and see if there's any last minute questions or. Bill?
So the healthcare facility, the thing at the bottom of that, this new definition combines and replaces the term hospital and medical centers as previously existing zoning definitions, question mark? I'm not sure.
Sharon, was that a parenthetical by you?
I'm sorry, I was doing something else. What was the
Page
question?
2?
Why is this question, is that supposed to be the closed parenthesis?
Or
Yes,
is it an
yes,
open
yeah, no, it's
question
a,
to the board
that's a clerical error. That question mark should not be there.
Which one was that?
page 2 of the definitions, healthcare facility. I don't know, is that something we want included in the actual zoning?
That sentence, you
To
mean?
me, that was guidance within the document for us to,
Yeah, I don't
that was
think-
my take on it. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
I don't think that sentence needs to be.
I don't think we need to explain what we did.
Strike that then.
Okay, strike that? Strike that.
There was a lot of guidance in it. This is a combined document. There was a lot of editorial comments.
There's a little edit too, that the sentence above that, the community and all its facilities shall be under one ownership. This is space, period.
I got it. Fix it.
Picky, but now we got nursing home, there's no period at the end, but there's periods at the other ends of, so maybe just keep the punctuation
You
consistent.
beat Rebecca to the punch on that.
I can,
Sorry.
I'm happy to go through it with the final edit if that's helpful.
Great.
How about font size?
Don't get me
Don't
started.
start. On style.
And there has not been any other changes to this since we all worked on it, so this is, you've all seen this before. Bill, another question?
No,
Oh.
I just circled another space between a period, but I'm sure Rebecca will catch that. So.
All right, so
Is this a
Rebecca has
test?
officially volunteered to do the
Yeah.
Something
grammar.
just occurred to me, Mr. Chairman, with the ADUs. We have a family ADU already on the books. I think something should be put in there to strike the definition of the one that we have and the special exception for them, because it's all folded into the other. I can't even remember the term of art that we used for it, but it was accessory family dwelling, which would allow, basically, we
It was under, excuse me for interrupt, but it was dwelling, and then secondarily, as a subset of dwelling, comma, accessory family. Yeah, so.
So that definition, is archaic if the other one,
That's
as
gonna
of
go,
now.
I assumed that was gonna go away.
Yes, but I think that we
We
have
have
to put
to.
that in
We have to.
verbiage too.
Yeah.
That with the adoption of the ADU strictures, that we would strike all references
We have
to
to list
the
that to be.
accessory family dwelling.
Okay, so that's bookkeeping, assuming the warrant article passes, correct?
Yes, but I mean, I think it should be included in there as far as, the net effect is that it scrubs that.
Okay, so we're gonna have an additional
Yes.
notation here.
Yeah, maybe down at
I
the
would
very end,
suggest-
just to,
Says the current definition, dwelling, comma, accessory family,
shall be deleted.
replaced by
Well,
You have to delete it first.
deleted.
yeah, do that in the definitions aspect of it.
It's really picky with legislative
Yeah.
stuff. You gotta take it out, get rid of it before
Because it
something else comes in.
appears in a couple of places in the zoning ordinance. One, it also has guidance standards for the special exception. So we need to strike that as well. We can give you the chapter and verse on that. As long as you're in agreement, we could come back to this at the second public hearing with the actual language that we should use.
Okay.
If it requires that. I mean, if you figure it's just housekeeping, chances are that we wouldn't need to have a hearing on that again. Or would?
No, you've got to take it out. Remember when we had whatever we had, I forget what it
Oh,
was,
yeah.
student residential, whatever it was, and it was archaic and it was no longer in use, nor should it be. We had to have a warrant article that says this has ceased and desist and no longer exists.
Okay, so we're actually going to have
Have to-
four.
Four, yeah. Yeah. Because we're
Okay, so-
removing one.
All right, so in the interest of closing the public hearing, do we have any other comments from the public on the proposed definition section?
Proposed definitions? Yes, I have two comments.
Okay,
One under healthcare facility. I'm reading this clinic, medical or dental, and we really have others such as Genesis, which is mental. And verbiage in here is all about the physical body rather than including the mental clinic treatment. And that, I just wondered if that was,
Well, I think licensed practitioners of the healing arts covers
okay.
your question there.
And tourist home, it's just a typo where the last part of the sentence, it says, and it's also owner occupied, probably wants an is in there, which also is owner occupied.
Where's that?
Where is it, Frank? In the which sentence?
I've got it on here with the rest of my
Yeah, here.
Tourist home.
corrections.
Tourist home, the last part, which with without meals, and which also is owner occupied. It has just owner occupied. It's just,
Oh, you need the article. Is.
need to add it as in there to make it flow.
I just have 2 cents. Clinic, medical, I mean, the, if you will, psychiatric arts. I mean, medical is overarching for that. It's a discipline of medicine, so maybe that would suffice, I don't know. So is dental, I don't know.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing at 13 minutes after 7. Back to the board for additional discussion on any of these exciting topics.
Do you recall when we opened it? I was ruffling through papers, ballpark. Well, it'll be on the tape.
708, something like that. That was
8 of, I think, maybe.
On this, can I go back to the sign? Is this only in regards to the verbiage of the sign, or is it the design and construction of the sign too? The reason I'm asking that is that there's quite a discussion about these new lead lights. I believe there's 2 signs on whatever the road is between here and Holderness, about blinding some of the drivers and so forth, and they were wondering about only downward signs, lighting.
There's language in the existing ordinance that speaks to illumination as far as it being distracted. I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay.
But to get back to your original question, it's only the content of the sign.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I thought.
yeah, we just have to view it. And you know, it kind of points up the difficulty, because that's covered under a different chapter, you get my drift. You know, so if it said, you know, church at 8, or, you know, eggs for $1, we have to view them the same way, and see if they fit within the other parts of the ordinance.
I just didn't want it to get skipped over. If it's there, it's there, so.
Any other questions or comments on definitions? I would note that tonight's public hearing was well advertised by Sharon. And that's the way it goes.
Now, the public does have a chance later on at either town meeting or something like that to
they could vote on it.
discuss this.
Well, to vote, but not to
They can't discuss it?
you can't change the format, I believe, of zoning ordinances at the public hearing.
So it's a done deal.
That's why we're having at the town meeting, that's why we're having our public hearing now, and then a second one to finally bless it, whenever.
So there will be a chance for another public, okay.
No, because it could just, then,
Is there a mechanism for changing warrant articles at the town
yes, but this is
meeting?
a zoning ordinance warrant article. It's different.
I don't know, I'm just curious.
If you think of town meeting as being purely financial meeting,
Right.
and everything else is on the ballot, it's an easy way for me to define what goes on
Right.
there versus what goes on here. But my question to the board is, do we need another public hearing if we're adding language about the ADUs? And
Well,
just to have it in its final form.
we should. I mean, the guidance here. Okay, okay, February 6th, which is a Monday, according to the OEP calendar, says that is the last day to hold the final public hearing and determine final form of amendments. And the RSA 675:3. I would say because of the clerical stuff, I mean, we have to be so picky about this. Even just the clerical stuff would create that premise, but since we've got to add a zoning amendment to delete something or remove it, number
Or
4.
incorporate it into the ADU amendment itself.
It also gives us another chance to sell the project to people that may have questions about it, so
Yeah.
why not?
Well, exactly, it's a little more promotion
Right.
of the whole thing, which is, we really want people to understand why we're doing this, and that it does provide some choice. So,
Okay, we have an old set of minutes. I don't suppose anybody has their copies with them, do they?
you only had one set, and I have it here, it's all scribbled on, but we didn't have a quorum.
Is that, do you have one copy? You can
Well,
pass it
these are
around.
December 1st minutes, so you really want to look at this? Go for it.
Well, we couldn't do it last time because we had.
Didn't have enough, right.
You want to just do this next time or what?
Why don't we do it next time, because we'll have December 15th also.
All right, we're going to do that next time.
It's a little more efficient.
All right, any other new business tonight?
No, just one question on this zoning bit. Just for definition under the zoning board of adjustment, can any of this be changed by the zoning board of adjustment? Okay.
No, it's planning board by public petition and/or planning board impetus to the voters, and the zoning board doesn't touch it. They
You guys
implement
decide
it.
the law, they rule on it.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I think, I didn't have, did you have a chance, you didn't have to look at Tara's document that she sent today, did you? Okay.
I'm too busy.
We may send it on to you guys that she had done a revision of the transportation section based on our conversations with the man's name I forget.
Ben?
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, no, I just didn't.
Okay,
There's
so
a
if
lot of
any-
back and forth, but
We'll pass that.
she wanted
pass
to
that
look
out by
at some
email.
other document that we had, so we're still duking that out.
Okay. Any other new business tonight, or old business, any business? Do you have any comments from the public, parting shots?
Yeah, just one in passing on this, one of the definitions is truck terminal, and I'm looking at our zoning ordinance in the village commercial zone, it's one of the allowed facilities, but looking at the piece of real estate we have on Main Street, it's really something that I don't think would fit in the downtown area. And because I think of the warehouses down there that are being used by private parties and not a third-party distribution center, which a truck terminal usually represents. So I'm just thinking about the application of it as far as the village commercial zone and this definition.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing we did discuss, Frank, a little bit, was trying to set a, to try to look at the zoning lines, at least one or two of them, during 2017, to try to straighten things out. And the village commercial district is one of the worst ones, I think, that you pointed out many times. And so maybe we can address that when we see if we can move those zoning lines around and look at, what the uses are at the same time.
Yeah, and any new definitions, Frank, that we haven't tried out, so to speak, yet. I mean, we certainly can change it
Yeah.
for 2018 if we
Right.
found it doesn't fly, so.
Yeah, I think after we do reevaluate the,
Yeah, right.
Okay, anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second.
Second.
Thank you very much.